Welcome to the MAM Journals. Today, as you've already worked out because you've seen the title on the beginning of the video, we're going to be talking about the Suzuki 1050 XT. But before we actually begin that, I'd like to sort of explore a couple of other ideas. 46% of the bikes that I own are actually sports bikes, i.e. they have clip-ons or lowered handlebars. Therefore, logically, 54% of them are more conventional upright bikes like this or naked retros. Human beings are very judgmental, sometimes negatively so, but the reality is often the only exercise we get is jumping to conclusions. Now, that has an impact in terms of how we view bikes. So the poster girls often attract far more attention and likes and publicity than the bikes we actually do most of our riding on. Because if, as I say, 46% of the bikes that I've got are sports bikes, I would be surprised if they actually amounted to more than 10% of the mileage I do in my 15 to 20,000 miles a year. So yes, we glamorise the exciting and exotic bikes, but in the real world, these are the bikes that we ride. So what this video is about is, what is this bike like to actually ride and live with? And I'm going to help you by comparing it to some of the other bikes of a similar category and class to give you some benchmarks to make your own decisions as to where you would rate this bike, a bike for the real world. Right, so let's have a look round the big V-Strom. The bike's equipped with a 1037cc V-twin. V-twins, of course, are not modern inventions. I think actually the second car that Daimler made, and that would have been 1889, was actually a V-twin. So it's certainly not new, but they come in and out of fashion, V-twins. So currently we seem to be going through the parallel twin fashion, but V-twins became very popular when, of course, Ducati did so well in World Superbikes with their V-twins, and all the other manufacturers decided they needed to produce a road version, and they actually produced a bike called the TL, which was the sort of beginning of the Suzuki V-twin. It had a bit of reputation as being a widow maker, but like most reputations, overplayed slightly, and really it just the suspension unit that they put on that particular bike didn't really suit lighter riders, but a very competent and good performance bike. This bike engine was originally developed from that, and this came out in 2002 in its first iteration, and obviously progressed since then. This one produces 106 brake horsepower. That's 107.4 PS, which is what they put in the brochure, and that's at 8,500 revs. It produces 100 Newton meters of torque at 6,000. The tank holds 20 litres. It looks like it holds more, but it's actually the same capacity tank as the 650, and indeed the BMs that we're going to be talking about a little bit as well. And with that, it will do, they say it does sort of 57 miles per gallon, and funny enough, I think it probably does. I'm certainly 52, 53 is what I got out of it, and I wasn't riding it particularly hard, which is interesting really, because the 650, they claim it does 67, and I can't get anything like 67 out of it. I do more like 57. So I actually do probably the same miles per gallon on this than I do on the small one, which may be indicative of how I ride the small one, as opposed, and how you don't need to push this one very hard to get the level of performance that you're looking for. In terms of seat height, this is 850 if you think millimeters. If you think in millimeters, 850 to 870. You can adjust it by just putting sort of spaces in at the back if you want it. This is in the low setting, but it's still pretty high. That's 34.3 inches. I am going to talk about height and show some height later, because for me it is an issue, but in fairness I'm below average height, so a bike of this height would be, and actually that's the same height, that 850 is the same height as a standard GS nowadays. It's not the same height as my GS, which is a lowered chassis one, which is 800 millimeters. The 650, by the way, is 835, just to give you an idea of variability. Now the bike is quite heavy. It's 545 pounds if you think in pounds. It's 247 kilos if you think in kilos. That's quite a bit heavier than the 650. It's actually 31 kilograms heavier than the 650, so quite a lot of sugar bags if you're carrying them. And in terms of weight, and in certain circumstances you can feel it. The bike's equipped with 19-inch front wheels and 17-inch rear wheels, which is actually all the bikes that we're looking at today, or I'm using to give you sort of benchmarks, are the same dimensions in that. Although there is currently, and when I'll touch on at the end, the new model coming out, 21-inch wheels are coming back into favour again, back into fashion, because they do have some benefits for genuine off-road work. V-Stroms have always been chain drive, which for purist tourers would argue that that's not the best way, that a shaft drive, like the ones fitted to the BMWs, is more suitable, but it does have certain power advantages in terms of you lose less power with a chain to the rear wheel than you will with a shaft because of the various inertia that you have to overcome. The bike is equipped with conventional but adjustable suspension, in so much as that you can adjust the preload on the front forks. You can adjust at the top there, you can adjust the rebound, and at the bottom on each fork you can adjust the compression. So pretty flexible in terms of what you can do with the front. The rear suspension is you can adjust the preload, and it's quite easy to do that, which is helpful on a bike which you may or may not be using sort of with pillion or otherwise. I like the handle on the outside, which it facilitates that, and you can also adjust at the bottom of the shock. You can adjust the rebound of the unit. Not quite as much adjustability as some, but certainly you have got some options in it. Suspension's good. And I'll give you some more feedback on that in terms when we're doing the riding section. But it's not as sophisticated as some of the more modern systems that are incorporating electronics. In terms of colour and finish, I actually quite like this very bright yellow. It's reminiscent of Suzuki's early off-road heritage. When they raced all their PEs and various other off-road bikes in these sort of colours. It's actually cleans up really nicely. I personally like the way that they've done the matte finish on the tank, matching in with the yellow graphics, and the seat is rugged and hard wearing. In terms of engine finish and protection, Suzuki have certainly the V-Stroms have a little bit of a reputation as being one that you need to keep on top of, and I would say that that's right. I mean, I've owned one, and if you do keep on top of them, they are okay, but they won't do it on themselves. So regular washing and protection should be part of your regime, particularly if you're going to use it, as I've been doing, in pretty muddy, greasy conditions. You can see this particular bike has actually had a light drop, I think on both sides actually, feeling on the edge of the crash bars, which have done their job. Dropped it down. It is quite a tall bike, as I touched on earlier, so I can see people tottering off it and gently putting it down. Just seems as there's some marks on there and on there, and you can see that it's sort of marked up, and indeed there is a little bit of rust appearing on that. So that's a good example of how it's basically an okay finish, but they're not perfect, and other more expensive bikes may have a better finish than this one. These magnesium look-alike colours, I can't believe 1 minute they are actually magnesium, certainly not by looking at the scales there, they aren't, but actually they polish up really well, and they were very easy to keep clean and to wash off. Quite a nice look and appearance to the bike. I actually quite like the openness of the V-twin. They do actually call these sort of engine covers, but I'm not sure that I quite go for that. But as I say, I do like that openness because it helps you when you're trying to keep a bike clean, that you can see exactly what's going on. Fairings do keep a lot of the rubbish off an engine, but they also manage to hide it when it's in there, and it's a bit more difficult to take it off because not everybody can be bothered to be taking fairings on and off. So I quite like that that adventure style openness for a bike that I'm going to ride all the year round. The bike has got quite a lot of technology on it. It's got various power modes, and it's really, well, that doesn't increase the power, it increases how direct the power and the throttle is connected. So it's got A, B and C modes, easy to change. You can obviously do them while the bike's static. You can see that I've pressed the mode button here, and I'm now going to cursor down. I can do A, B at the moment, or C mode. I didn't try it in C, I don't tend to on bikes that I have, and I do tend to end up sort of ending up back in A again. So you press that, then you go down. You've got, in terms of traction control, it's got one more level than the 650, which is 1, 2 or off. This has got off, 1, 2 or 3. And again, I tend to like the least amount of intervention, but do want the benefit of traction control, particularly in the conditions that I rode in. So I tend to go for 1. And then your ABS, you've just got 2 positions on that. I don't need to show you through it, which allows you to have little intervention, i.e. minimalist ABS, or something that intervenes more quickly, 1 being the least intervention, not surprisingly the one that I've chosen. I do like technology, but I do actually want to ride the bike. Okay, now that we've had a good look at the Suzuki, the 1050, let's sort of benchmark it a bit against some of the others. In terms of technology on bikes, the 1050 has got the second highest level. The highest level of technology on any of these bikes is obviously the GS Trophy, the latest R1250 GS, which has got far more sophistication in terms of its modes for power, and it's got much more sophisticated suspension with its electronic dynamic adjustment on it. It's also got gear change assist on there. The Suzuki, the new Suzuki which comes out, actually the DE version, and I'll touch on that in my concluding comments, will have the Suzuki quick shifter up and down, but I've got to say, as a general rule of thumb, Suzuki's gearboxes are, in my opinion, better than the gearboxes fitted to the GS. But technology wise, GS is first and the big V-Strom is second. Probably the most primitive of the bikes is the oldest of the bikes, the 2006 bike at the rear there. That's the GS. It has actually got ABS, although it was an option at that point, but there's no traction control or anything of that type. It's a very mechanical bike and feels so when you ride it. In terms of actual performance, the fastest of the bikes, although I'm not sure really how relevant those numbers are, is actually the V-Strom. That's 138 miles an hour, allegedly 133 on the Trophy. I've seen tests where they've said 115 on the 650, but I think they're 120. And they always say the conventional GS there, the non-liquid cooled one, is about 130. But the real performance of these sort of bikes is not top end. I mean, how often will we actually want to risk going to jail to find out how fast an adventure goes? It's probably pretty limited. But in terms of that mid-range performance, the torque on the GS, the latest GS, is enormous. It's got 143 newton meters of torque when compared to the 100 newton meters of torque on the big V-Strom. In terms of real-world performance, the V-Strom 1050 is the second in terms of that performance torque, that mid-range acceleration, followed by certainly on paper the old GS should be faster, but it isn't in the real world. And then obviously you'd expect the 650 to be the one that you have to work the hardest in order to get some level of performance out of it. In terms of seat height, which isn't, for most people, if you're above average height, all of this is fairly academic, because all of them will be easy to ride if you've got an inside leg measurement of 32 inches plus. But for some of us, seat height is critical, and it certainly has been for me, as I've worked out what bikes I actually like doing larger mileages on and carrying a pillion. So this GS is a lower chassis version, so it's actually the lowest of all the bikes here today. So that actually is 800 millimeters in terms of seat height, whilst the Suzuki is actually 850, which is the same height as the standard 1250 GS. So both of those are actually quite tall bikes if you're buying them standard from the showroom. Probably taller than I would want to ride, if I'm honest, on a regular basis, and certainly 2 up. The V-Strom 650 is a little bit lower, and one of the reasons why I chose that as my bike I largely use it in the winter bike, but in fairness to it, it's not just a winter bike, it's a very capable mid-weight upright adventure style bike in its own right. The GS at the back is the one that I really concluded I needed a bike that wasn't as tall as that, and something that was easier for me to ride. That was the one that drove the decisions for me to buy the low chassis bike, and indeed my other bike, which is comparatively low but capable of carrying 2 people, which is my Suzuki 1000 GT. So hopefully that's given you a framework to understand what the bikes do in relation to one another, and some sort of context in terms of comparisons. But enough on that. What was it actually like to ride? What did I think about riding it? And funnily enough, what was I thinking about whilst I was riding it? Once I actually got on it, the bike is instantly easy and comfortable to ride. It's balanced, smooth, and with easy to control switchgear and instruments. I'm not convinced that the 80s green screen look of the LCD dash is actually to my taste, but it was clear and functional. The roads were fairly greasy during most of my riding, and I alternated between power modes A and B as I explored what best suited me. I did actually manage to set the traction control warning light off, well, activate the traction control in reality, on quite a few occasions whilst I was in A mode, but I was deliberately holding the revs higher than you might normally do, just to see at what point it kicked in. Flashing traction lights aren't everybody's idea of easygoing riding, but they're easily avoided simply by reducing the engine power mode, perhaps ride it in B in the sort of conditions that I was riding on, if that bothers you. I rode the bike on a number of different days and chose different routes to explore the versatility of the bike, and I actually covered just under 300 miles. The bike is certainly comfortable on A roads, dual carriageways and motorways, effortlessly making progress with plenty of power available when you want to overtake. It's a stable, and at road legal speeds there is little vibration through the bars. This is the Burford to Byberry road that some of you may have heard Henry Cole from the motorbike show talk about. Slightly less picturesque at this time of the year than when Henry sensibly films it. It does remain a nice road, but you have to keep your eyes open for mud on the road. The bike does handle these conditions well, although I did find myself a little careful with the front end. I don't know the bike well, and the tyres didn't give me the feedback and sense of contact that some others of my bikes do. Possibly unfair, the front never let go and grip was okay throughout. I have no doubt this bike could make good progress on this road in warmer, drier conditions. Once in Bibury, I took the little lane out to the classic motor hub at Ablington, the old Bibury airfield. Plenty of potholes, damaged edges and loose gravel along here, and it demonstrated to me the sophistication of my R1250 GS dynamic electronic suspension adjustment. It copes with these types of roads significantly better than the conventional style suspension of the big V-Strom. The V-Strom was okay, but electronic suspension and adjustment does have its advantages, albeit at a price. I rode through Lower Slaughter, an interesting name for a village, and which is definitely Range Rover territory. I'm not sure why they ever named the villages Slaughters, but the hotels here certainly slaughter your wallet. It's probably on these smaller roads that the 1050 is at its most disadvantaged. With no benefit of the extra power, I was more conscious of the weight and height of the bike, and I would have been more comfortable riding my lighter, more agile and closer to the ground 650 XT. Once on slightly bigger roads, the bike came back into its own. This is actually one of my favourite roads, the Stow-on-the-Wold to Burford Road, a road that Gloucestershire Council seem to suggest I can ride safely at 60, but Oxfordshire Council feel I need to ride at 50. Not wishing to be overtaken by gravel trucks, I just keep with the flow. It's a nice road on high ground with panoramic views of the surrounding countryside. The area was home to numerous military airfields in the Second World War and is still home to military transport aircraft today. You can see one on the horizon here. This is Burford's Church of St John the Baptist, a Grade 1 listed building that is one of the top 10 visited churches in the country. Work started in 1175 and it was completed in 1500. Why rush when you can take your time? It's a bit like riding this bike, really. In town, the bike was easy to ride and nicely balanced. The new 20 mph limits in Oxford are somewhere between second and third gear, depending on the conditions. Adverse camber junctions can be a challenge as a result of the height, but probably more so actually in faster rural areas when you're approaching the junction a little faster than you are in a built-up conurbation. Oxford, for those of you that are interested, was once the alternative capital of England when Charles I, exiled from London in the Civil War, set up court in what we locally know as Christchurch College, but some of you might recognise as Hogwarts dining room. It's interesting that then Oxford sided with the traditionalists, i.e. the Royalists, and today they would probably be the new Puritans. The bike is probably at its best on the open road and dual carriageways. And although I didn't try it with a pillion and luggage, it is clearly well equipped for long hauls. The new model that's been launched this year, called the DE, actually replaces this model, the XT, although they are retaining a 1050 more road-going based bike as the alternative between the two. The new model has a quick shifter, up and down, which will enhance an already good gearbox. But whether the 21-inch front wheel or gravel mode will improve the road character is unlikely. The new model will almost certainly be more capable off-road than this one, but personally my ambition to seriously ride a 550 odd pound bike off-road is somewhere between low and non-existent, but each to their own. Gravel roads and dirt roads, when you can find them, depending on which country you live in, yes of course, but into the wilds? not for me. Once you get used to the dimensions of the bike, and it didn't take long to be honest, you will be filtering this bike with ease and making good progress on greasy roads or not. I rode 150 miles in a morning and it was effortless, and you can tell by my historic ramblings, very relaxed. Not perfect, I prefer my other bikes in some conditions. This 1050, however, is a bike you can certainly cover the ground on. Right, so how do we make some conclusions out of all of that? Well, as we can see, as we've talked about it, the bike has lots of merits, and it has one or two things which it's not as good as some other bikes. That's, I guess, what you'd expect in the real world. But one thing that we haven't talked about yet, and is actually probably one of the main deciding factors in people's decisions to buy bikes, is, well, how much money are they? There's no question in my mind that the BMW is a better bike. So it should be. It's £20,000. This bike, or there's one like this, you'll pick one up somewhere between £9,000 and maybe, if you want to go for a brand new one, maybe £12,500. So significant difference in price, and these offer excellent value for those in the real world who aren't in a lucky enough position to have multiple bikes, and they need a bike that can do a multitude of tasks whilst only taking one garage space. This is a bike you could go to work on. This is a bike you could ride around on a Sunday for a bit of fun, albeit it wouldn't be the sort of engaged ride that some of the bikes I have offer you. Or indeed, you could tour to the south of France quite comfortably. It would do good speeds all day long and deliver good fuel economy. It's a reliable, well-proven, tested engine, and providing you look after the bike and keep it fairly cleaned and protected from the elements, I think it will give you good, long, loyal service for a good length of time. So would I buy one? Well, honestly, no. It's too big, it's too heavy, and it's too tall. So, and I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I can afford the low chassis BMW GS, which is a more sophisticated all-round bike that offers very similar characteristics as this one. Do I think it's a good bike and that you should put it on your shopping list? I think you should. If you're deciding that you want to spend significantly less, I think you should have a look at both the ones that I've talked about, and indeed I think the BMW perhaps 900 would be worth a look at, or the Yamaha. The MT is a popular bike, albeit I think you could probably get a better deal on the Suzuki than you will on the Yamaha. But all of them are very capable real world bikes that could offer a lot of pleasure and a lot of satisfaction. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I hope that you found it useful and informative. And if you did, you perhaps might like to press like or even subscribe to the channel. But as always, regardless of whether you do any of that, what I do hope that you do is that you ride safe and you stay well.